Here we are with Grow, my second album. I started working on this one pretty much right after finishing my first one, and I decided to give this album a specific theme this time around, so if you don't want to know exactly what every single song on this album represents, this is your spoiler warning. The theme of this album is me. It's about my life. This first track is called Form, and it's about me being born, an event that I am very thankful took place as I get to do stuff like make music and exist. At the beginning of this track, we have this back and forth duet between the string bass and the bells. The string bass represents my father, and the bells represent my mother. I thought it would be a decent way to represent that using like a strong low instrument and then a light or high instrument. As the melody builds, I put in modified versions of the melodies from my last album, the songs Out and Chordless. And also, the chords of this track are from Pachelbel's Canon in D, which is a song that I immediately fell in love with the first time that I heard it. This song also features my voice, something I decided to put in a lot of places in this album. So in this section, my voice starts to come in, and what it comes in with was a counter melody that I remember from a time that I played Pachelbel's Canon in D in band, and it was like the melody the clarinets were playing or something approximating that. I just basically put it in because it fits all of the chords. And so at this section we get this whole build up as the melodies of those other two tracks come in on like these violins. Now, those melodies from my previous album don't match exactly. They're modified to fit the chords, which is something that I like to do a lot when I'm working with chords that don't quite match. So then, yeah, after that build-up, we get this new melody. And this new melody that's playing right here on this soft pluck is me. It represents me. And there's also me humming in the background, of course. Then the bells start to come back in, and so do the low strings, and so all three melodies are interacting. It's all three of us. There's me, my mom, and my dad. And so yeah, this section repeats with me singing alongside that new melody. Originally I didn't have myself singing along with a lot of these tracks, but I later added these vocals to them. I don't know, there was just something about it that sort of fit nicely, and I also just like to sing, so that sort of just worked out. And then we start to get into this next section here. This is where I add another counter melody that plays on the piano here, and I reuse versions of this counter melody in several other tracks of this album. We can call it the Luke counter melody, basically. It's the most repeated leitmotif that I have in this project, but I also repeat other melodies from my previous album in other tracks as well sometimes. I just thought it would be fun to have some repetition in there. You know, funny enough, there's a portion of this Luke counter melody that actually just is some of the notes from the melody of Out, so that's just already a part of that. And already from this first track we can see that there's a lot of differences between this and the kinds of tracks that I had on my first album. I think I've made a lot of changes in my music style, at least for this particular project, but that's the first track. So, here's the question. What do you do after being born? Well, you grow. And this track is also the name of the album, because the overall theme of this album is me growing up. For this track, the 6/8 time signature and electric guitars are kind of inspired by some of the sounds of one of my favorite artists, Infected Mushroom. Their song Flamingo kind of has some of this stuff. So each song from this point forward represents about a 2 to 3 year portion of my life, and as you could imagine, this being the years like 0 to 3, I don't exactly remember a lot from this, but the process of growing, especially as a young child, involves transitioning from a state of chaos and not even being conscious, it's just all confusion, everything is terrifying, to a state of order and understanding. And so, to represent that in this song, I had the song start off with this minor melody in this minor key, and then have it shift halfway through to a major key. I also experimented a little bit with some gates here in order to get this synth that goes from doing longer notes to doing shorter notes in this part. Another thing I'm quite happy with on this song is what I did with the toms and the drums in general. I've always been looking for a really nice tom sound, one that's really really powerful, and so that's something that sort of worked out with this track. So right around here is the portion of the track where it switches to major, and as you can see, a lot of the instruments cut out here. And I really kind of like that because it's kind of a bit of a surprise just halfway through the track for it to change key like that. And actually, right around here, during this build-up right after the shift, I just straight up use the melody of my track chordless. I just put it right in there, and it actually plays really well with the existing melody here. I really like how that all works out. And then it drops with this major key melody, and then the vocals cut in at this point. And it's all just sort of meant to represent sort of this like final enlightenment of like things are okay. They're going from a confusing, stressful state to like oh, this is nice. Like this is doable. This is real life. And so yeah, that basically concludes this track, which I thought was quite a nice track. It's kind of a banger. It's kind of nice. So this third track is it's called Voice. It's one of my favorites that I made, and from the name, it's pretty obvious what it's about. Because, well, from age 3 or so is really when you start to gain your voice. The main melody of this one I came up with in the shower after waking up one morning, and I was like, oh dang, I gotta immediately put this into the software and record this, because this is nice. I like this. And from that point on, I knew that this would have to be something that I did the hums for, and kind of sang in this way. I just thought that it really matched as something that you just kind of sing like a tune. I layer my voice like there are so many different layers of me singing this that are all playing at the same time, some of them in different ears too. So it's pretty interesting trying to get all of those to layer properly. By the end of editing this, my software was lagging very hard to the point where I couldn't even play it without delay. So right here is where I first used the Luke counter melody again. This sort of soft bell in the background starts playing along really softly with the rest of that, and it's sort of that melody from the first track. And when we grow up, we start out incoherent. Which is why this track actually has no actual lyrics. It's just voices singing a melody, humming, or whistling along. And there's even this section here with the voices chanting something. But there are no real words here. I'm just saying like home go see kalesi kal, like there's no meaning behind it. It was literally just the first random syllables that came to mind when I was thinking about the rhythm that I wanted for the chant. And here is this second melody, which I made specifically to mesh well with the first one. This was so that I would have the opportunity to introduce each melody separately and then have a later section of the song where both of them play together, as you'll see coming up here. This is the kind of track that I would actually like to learn how to play on the piano. I basically just composed it by programming it in. I don't actually know how easy it would be to play on the piano, but it's a really nice melody. So this is the section where the percussion comes in, and funny thing is the percussion for this track is actually just me making noises with my mouth. The kick and hats, they're just mouth noises, and the crash is just me going psh in the background, which is kind of funny. Right around here is when we get the section where both voice melodies get to come together. It's really nice listening to how these layer to each other, and like how I shift the vocals from being far into the side of like your headphones and some in the middle, because I had to make room for all of these different voices. Funny enough, a long time after I made this track, I kind of realized that some of the melody is pretty similar to a section of Purple's theme from the PSP game Loco Roco 2. I don't know if you've ever played a Loco Roco game, kind of obscure PSP games, but the music in those games is just crazy. You got all sorts of things, and There are so many tracks from Loco Roco that I just absolutely love for no reason. But yeah, that's Voice. I wanted to make a track that was very much based on just singing and had a lot of vocal elements in it. So this song is Class, and it's a very electronic track. I really like how it turned out. And the reason it's called Class is because the song is actually about my kindergarten class growing up. So tell me this, have you ever heard of the song The Chicken Dance? It was called The Chicken Dance. It's the one, you know, you do the song, you do the dance to. Well, the high synth in the beginning of this class actually, when it starts to repeat itself, kind of mirrors a little bit of the chicken dance. Now, why? Well, several times in my time at kindergarten, the teacher would play the chicken dance, and the class would get up and we'd all do the dance. And I was supposed to participate, but I hated it so much. I thought that the chicken dance, I thought the whole thing was extremely humiliating. So I would get really angry and sit down and just refuse to participate whenever we would play the song. The other synth that just came in a bit ago was also inspired by the iOS app Aerox. I think I mentioned that in my last commentary, how I was inspired by that. I love the soundtrack of Aerox. Just some random iOS mobile game where you tilt a ball around, but banger soundtrack. So now we get to this section that chants 1, 2, red, blue. And I think a lot of people assume that this is a reference to One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish by Dr. Seuss, which it is, yes, but it actually also has a deeper personal meaning to me. Basically, in kindergarten, if I remember correctly, we would only actually go to school once every second day, and it would actually switch off, so the class would be split into two groups. One group would go one day, and the next group would go the next day, and how they organized this is they had the red group and the blue group. Now, I was part of the red group, and so were all of my brothers before me, apparently. It's basically a family thing. I don't actually know how that works. But tragically, one of the few people that I had met in my time in pre-kindergarten was placed in the blue group. And so I never got to see him around, like, at all. And except for the very rare occasions where the entire group would get together to like do things like performances or graduation ceremonies and stuff. So I barely got to see my friend because he was in the blue group. But yeah, those groups have always stuck with me as an interesting thing, and so I put it into this track as part of it. This track has a lot of just kind of random glitchy percussion things, which I think I actually really like to put into some songs. A lot of songs, it's easy to fill up the bass, but getting the high end full of actual stuff is kind of difficult. It's like, oh, that's just, those frequencies are just for the hi-hat. That's it, nothing else, pretty much. So, yeah, there was one of the kits that I had access to with my software that had these glitches, and so I made like one loop where the glitches hit on the different interesting beats, and then I used that throughout this track, and I think it worked out pretty well because this track sort of has a nice, very rhythmic groove to it because of those high-end aspects. So now we have Medley, and it is a medley. It's a compilation of some of my favorite melodies that made an impact on me throughout my life. And of course it starts with the main chords of Canon and D, but then right after this next part, we actually get to a song called Bedtime Round by Tom Chapin. I'm using the melody from that. I don't actually play the whole round because it does work really well as a round, but I highly recommend you look up the song and give it a listen. And then, imagine you're 5 years old and listening to it on repeat, trying to fall asleep at your grandparents' house, because that's where I first heard it, and it's kind of been a core memory for me ever since. This next melody that came in a bit ago is Loch Lomond. I was in band starting in grade 4, and one of the pieces that we played was just a piece called Scottish March, but it was actually the melody of Loch Lomond. Several years later, I was part of a choir, and we did a really amazing version of Loch Lomond as well, so that song has always been special to me. The next one that comes in is the melody of Shenandoah, another one of my favorite band pieces, which happens to play pretty well with Loch Lomond, actually, which just kind of works out. And I also use that ending to end off this section. And then comes in Dixie, and what's funny about this is I first heard this melody in a YouTube video by Mystery Guitar Man called Teeny Joe Band, and I didn't actually know that this was a melody of another song until years later, but I really love the version that he did in that video. So this song actually copies the bass line and harmony that he used in that video's version of the song. Then comes in this modified version of the song Peter Piper by Frank Mills. There were a couple moments growing up where I was chilling in the living room and my dad would play this song on the piano, and I really loved it, and now I can actually play some of it myself. After this section with Peter Piper, we shift to two more different melodies. One of them is the song Rosa Midre by Ralph Vaughan Williams. It's another piece that I played in band, and it was absolutely one of my favorites. The other melody is Pie Jesu, a beautiful song that I first heard in a high school choir, and it's stuck with me ever since. And so then for this next part, we return to canon in D, but actually going forward here, I put in the bass, the bells, and a section of the Luke counter melody straight off of Form, the first track of this album. I just thought, hey, I'm using canon in D anyway, that song used canon in D, I might as well loop back to the elements that I originally used in the first track. I'm using all MIDI instruments for all of this, even the orchestral stuff, so I sort of have to strike a balance of how fake it all sounds. I mean, it's all gonna sound fake to some extent, but I had different ways to make it a little more real by randomizing the velocity of certain things and stuff like that. So in this part, when we return to Bedtime Round, you can also hear a modified version of Angel of Music from the Phantom of the Opera. That, I actually first heard that melody when playing a Phantom of the Opera piece in band because I had never actually seen the Phantom of the Opera. Then I saw it later. And can someone explain to me why the goal of every musical ever is just to make the audience cry? And why does it always work? But yeah, at this point in the song, we're basically doing similar melodies to what we had at the beginning. But as you can see right here, I also throw in a piano that plays the melody of Chordless over the Loch Lomond and Shenandoah to finish this track off, which it's interesting. I just wanted to see how many things I could stack in this medley and make them all sound relatively good together. And I think it turned out pretty well for the most part. So this is Effect, and this is a track I made specifically for a very good friend of mine. He's a friend that I met in band way back, like close to when I was in grade 4, and then I just forgot about him entirely. But then, funny enough, we met up again in choir years later, and we immediately recognized each other when I joined the choir, but neither of us had any idea where we had last met until years later when he found a photo of both of us in band, and we were like, oh yeah, we totally were in band, and it was actually really cool. But yeah, he's a great friend. So he requested I make this song in a certain upbeat style, and he gave me a couple tracks to reference, and I think one of them was like a Splatoon track, so that was part of what I was basing some of this on, sort of a video gamey feel to it. And I then, during the production of this, decided to drink a very large cup of coffee, and that's what inspired me to make the middle section we're getting into right now. I was just like, man, it would be really cool if I just made it change into some sick bass section with like this regular beat, and then I'd come in with like the hi-hats and all of this stuff. I just thought that this would be really cool. And then the 16th notes here are also swung just a little bit, and the melody comes back in, but it's got a bit of a different feel because the bass does like this minor thing going on, so it's pretty cool. I don't have too much more to say about this song, but I think one thing that makes it unique is also just the way that in the section at the beginning and the section that we're going to get into after this middle section, the way that it's structured, like it does its melody and then it does its sort of halftime other thing, and then goes into another sort of lead up section. It's structured a little bit differently than I structure other songs, because a lot of the time I'm structuring songs by first creating like a loop that lasts a certain amount of measures and then sort of stacking those like Lego bricks one after another. But this one, every section sort of just leads into its next one a little more naturally than it does in some of my other songs, which I thought was actually pretty cool. Now, it's cool because for the rest of this track, we return to how it was in the beginning, but if you notice, the bass that got introduced during the shift section is actually along for the ride. And it's funny because this is kind of like how, when you make a new friend, they add something new into your life and sort of change your style. And then going forward, they stick with you and add even more things to your life. And I just sort of noticed that that's kind of like a metaphorical representation of what went on with this song. It's it actually kind of worked out that way. It wasn't something I originally intended, but looking back, that's sort of what the song represents. I decided to call the song Effect because it represents the time in my life when I first started making videos for this YouTube channel. And as a part of that, I started learning about video effects. So yeah, we're getting to the last couple tracks on this, and so yeah, we're getting a lot closer to modern day now with the time frame on these. Poison is the first song that I've ever wrote that has lyrics, and I was a bit nervous about writing a song with lyrics. It tells a literal story, which itself tells a much more metaphorical story. The literal story that you can see in the lyrics is it's a second-person narration of a man who finds a new ingredient, and this new ingredient pretty much acts like any kind of hard drug would, getting the user really high, but then destroying them in some way afterwards. And the person in the story uses the ingredient in a recipe. But the recipe only calls for 1 tablespoon of the ingredient, but as you can see, as I describe in the song, he puts in 2, so he's basically overdosing to make sure that he gets the full effects, but there's also the clear implication there that he's trying to take an amount that is going to kill him. So yeah, in the story, he sees this opportunity to get the high that he's looking for. He then follows the recipe or whatever ritual is associated with it. He removes all the doubts from his mind because his desire for the high has left him totally blind to it. And then he eats the recipe, and for that brief moment, he's exactly where he wants to be. He feels like he's found the answer to all of his life's troubles, but he can't sustain it. You can't stay in that state forever, and he immediately starts to have doubts about what he's done. Afterwards, his mind clears and he realizes that there's nothing left for him now but to face the consequences, so he lies down and hopes that he's gonna die like he planned. But he doesn't die, he wakes up. And because he's alive, he has to face the pain and the consequences of his decision, but he has a second chance to make better decisions in the future. What's done is done, but his slate is clean, and he can always start from where he is now. Musically, this was interesting to figure out how to record vocals and how to try to get takes that I liked. I tried so many takes of this that I didn't like, and I think I actually transposed it a little low for my regular voice key and everything. Another thing that I used in the later sections of this song was using portions of the melody of O mio babbino carno, which is like, I think, some kind of opera thing. I first heard it in a Peanuts cartoon, like it was My Best Birthday Ever, Charlie Brown, I think it was. And then also it actually also appeared in, I think, the Mr. Bean movie, surprisingly poignant movie, by the way. Another thing this song represents a little bit is my first ever relationship, which lasted for a couple years around this portion in my life, and it was sort of something that I look back at and I see a lot of mistakes that I made around it, and sort of fits the themes of this track that I will go into later, but I won't go into that in too much detail. You know, I've always considered myself a pretty decent singer, but the moment that you get access to auto-tune and tools like that, you really realize just how far away from perfect you are a lot of the time. And I don't exactly have a perfect environment here to record, so yeah, it was an interesting process trying to get a good take, or a take that I liked well enough of this in order to actually put it in a track that I was willing to fully release. The final lines of this track, I think I really like a lot, what I came up with there. That basically outlines the whole moral of the story, which is that you can try to ride like waves of pleasure up and down, but you have to go up and then all the way down. But if you slowly work to raise the tide, you can reach the same heights and gain much more reward. But the only way that that's going to happen in your life is when you absolutely can't stand feeling weak anymore. And that's what that final verse is all about. The way I see it, whatever you first thought this song was about when you first heard it, you were probably right, because it's fundamentally about all the self-destructive behaviors that we use to medicate ourselves, the shortcuts that we take just to feel good or stop feeling bad. I think this is a song everyone can relate to on some level, and so I'm pretty proud of it, even if my singing isn't perfect. And after that last track, all we have left is Now. And that's what this song is about. It's about making it to the present, or at least the present when I wrote this song. The process of writing a lot of my songs usually goes that I will write some kind of basic melodies, put them into some kind of structure, and then render that out and listen to it for a solid like week or two or a month, and then try to find parts of it that I don't like, or spaces that I need to fill in, or other imperfections that I would need to change before it's going to be something I would consider perfect enough. But for this track, I actually, on purpose, decided to not worry about making it perfect. And so it's a very simple track. It's only got like the piano, the bass, the shaker, a little bit of these sort of bongo things. And funny enough, the shaker even goes just a little bit off of perfect time here and there. It's just a little bit like wonky. And I think this song was meant to represent a level of acceptance that I've hoped that I had reached by this point. It was sort of just being like, you know, I am where I am, and not everything that I release musically is going to be a masterpiece right now, but everything that I do make is on the road to something, and so it doesn't have to be perfect. This is a big takeaway in general that I sometimes struggle to remind myself of, is to accept myself where I'm at while still working to improve. Like, funny enough, you can do both, and you kind of have to. Like, you're already good enough just because you exist, you're here, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't get better than the person that you are right now, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't try to get better all of the time. Personally, I get a weirdly constant fear that eventually I'm just going to lose all motivation and start some kind of downward spiral where I really let myself go. I stop caring about anything. I stop trying to put effort into things. I give up on things that I previously worked really hard at, and I just lose like a whole bunch of progress and basically lose everything that I've built up. And so there's a pretty decent fear there when you're on a good trajectory of like falling back down to a bad place. But then when I really think about it, I've actually got a pretty good track record. Like, I haven't given up to this point. I haven't stopped caring about things. I've been making myself better, And as far as I know, I'm planning to continue doing that. And this being the end of the album, really that is what this album is all about. It's about making yourself better and continuing to grow.